Okay, I think we're here.
Hi, Lara Marie.
Oh, hi.
I was thinking about like a proper introduction for you, and I was like, how do I even, aside from being one of my best friends, work wife extraordinaire, graphic designer, web designer, expert talking off the ledger. What else do you do? What else do you actually do?
I paint. That's
expert painter? Yep.
I wouldn't say expert. I'm a hobbyist, I would say.
All right.
I'm a mom.
She's a mom.
I'm a mom of 2 kids, one on the spectrum, one is 5 months old. So, we never know. You never know.
You never actually know. And
you really never know, except I did know right away with Oliver, but we'll get into that.
Well, I'm curious too, okay, so for those people that maybe don't know how, I think we're kind of moving away from using the word autistic as a broad stroke sort of marker for folks. And so if you were to be having a conversation similarly to the one that we're going to have about you and your baby, how are you explaining that to folks, that you're on the spectrum?
I think that people get it, and it's a little bit easier on me if I will refer to myself as autistic all the time, but I'm very different than Oliver. I was diagnosed as an adult. Oliver was diagnosed as a child. There's a lot of different idiosyncrasies, I think, with the language that some people mind, some people don't mind. I personally don't care about the word autistic. That's how I do now. It's part of who I am and part of my identity. But I would say we're both on the spectrum. The spectrum is very large and big, and, there are lots of different, ways to kind of feel a part of that, I guess, or not feel a part of it, but be a part of it. I have had exposure to kids on the spectrum since I was very, very, very young. I was a camp counselor, actually, at a one-on-one camp for kids with special needs. And I definitely learned how big the spectrum is from that experience. I was with a couple of different kids. One was nonverbal. One was hyperverbal and extremely with it and very functional. And that's how my son is. My son is classified as 2E, which means twice exceptional. He is brilliant. Without feeling like I'm being a braggy mom. He's very, very smart.
I can attest to this. So they're braggy mom.
And he hyper focuses on certain things. But also the other exception is that he is highly excitable. He flaps. He has tics. And I think that it's really great that right now he's growing up in a time where he doesn't have to mask those tics. He's also we're fortunate enough that he is in a school that he definitely doesn't have to make those kind of, adjustments like I did to his personality and the way that he processes things, because they're very understanding of it. There's kids that are in the at his school, there's many kids that are high functioning and on the spectrum because it's a school for gifted kids. So I definitely, I'm very, very thankful that we're in a time now where Ollie doesn't have to modulate parts of his personality that, frankly, I think are so cute. I love when he when he flaps, because I know what it means, which means he's so excited about something. And it's so sweet, because he does it a lot, because now he has a younger brother, which he's been wanting a sibling forever and ever, and he gets so excited when his brother does something really cute, and he'll flap, and I'm like, oh my God, you're the cutest thing in the world. I love him. But yeah, as far as processing, I think that that's kind of what most is going to be most relevant for us to talk about in terms of like this podcast, your, like who's listening, is that like everybody processes different. I did have to we call it masking or modulate like certain behaviors that I had growing up because they were just viewed as me being, having too much energy or, just being too outspoken or not like knowing, being self-aware. And that's not the case. I'm actually an extremely, very, very hyper self-aware person. Right. I think maybe part of it is I am hyper self-aware because I had to be. That is where I cook a lot. I mean, it is definitely a time where, because there is instructions, and again, it's a spectrum. So like for me, lists, instructions, certain kinds of visual structure and structures that I can follow along with are like a relief to me.
Super helpful. Okay, so just to interject, just so we can tell everybody what we're doing, we're going to talk about cooking and what it's like to be in the kitchen as somebody that's autistic or on the spectrum or neurodivergent, what it's like to exist in that space, what it's like to cook for a family, what it looks like to cook for yourself, and then what it also looks like to have a child that's on the spectrum and potentially wanting to incorporate them in the kitchen with you as well. So, like I said,
also like editing.
Go ahead.
No, like editing too. Like Ollie has different textural issues. So like cooking for a family, but also for a family that includes a kid that's on the spectrum. So it's a different experience, I would imagine.
Well, and I think that's where I wanted to go with this. So like I said, here we are just having this casual conversation, and people are like, the fuck does this have to do with butter and cooking?
Hello?
This is what it has to do.
We love butter. That's because we both love butter. The end.
Put your seatbelt on. That's what we're doing. We're going to talk about, again, what it's like to be on the spectrum and be in the kitchen. So with that, as you were just saying, that having structure in your kitchen, and that's helpful to you personally, right?
Very, very helpful. Yeah, it helps me. So like, as somebody that is neurodivergent, my mind often bounces many, many different directions, places, all over the place. It actually is something that I've learned to cope with in terms of my work. Like I can multitask like a mother effer because of that, but also like daily executive function things are harder for me because unless I put a structure in place to follow, it's just kind of like, oh, we're just going along our day, and this is like around the time that we do this, and this is around the time that we do that. When I'm in the kitchen, and whether I am following a recipe or adapting a recipe or, following instructions, it's something that allows me to kind of shut my brain off in a way, and trust my senses, like my sense of smell and to taste things and be looking at texture, and it's something that's like all encompassing for me. So It's always been definitely like a place for me to feel a little bit more normal.
Right.
So, and I definitely have short-term and long-term memory issues as part of like how I process information. So recipes are super helpful for me in that way as well. And then I almost always riff. I know you and I are similar this way. Like nothing is always going to be exactly the same ever unless I'm, doing it for like somebody asked exactly the same thing. Even like my great-grandmother's sauce, which I cook probably every week because it's the boys' favorite thing to eat. I never measure. It's always a roundabout thing. And that to me is, as funny as it sounds, is a way to like cut loose and feel free. Like I'm diverging from the recipe a little bit, which sounds hilarious. I'm going rogue. I'm real crazy in the kitchen. Anyway, yeah, so that's something that is really a release for me, and I love cooking because of that. So in terms of
thing though,
sorry,
because we're like you and I are similar in the ways of like, if you've been following along, okay, from the very beginning, I have used cooking and or baking as like a means to cope, right? Or like another form of therapy, essentially. And so in all of the same ways that I sort of find reprieve in the kitchen in terms of like, I can turn my brain off, I can like kind of sink back into my body and kind of own that and embody what it's like to be inside of me and use other senses and kind of settle into that. I think that that's also, and I know what you mean, but like, we're not going to say what it's like to be quote unquote normal. I mean, you can call it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have to make an adjustment. In other words, like I can just truly trust what's in front of me and my own self and kind of, because being on the spectrum, a lot of it is questioning literally everything you do. Like, everything I do, I'm like, oh, was that weird? Are people going to understand me? Are people going to, I have a different way of processing and thinking. So, and I know I've even said it to you, and we talk multiple times a day, every day, like
all day long.
And you're probably one of the people that understands me the best. And I still will be like, I just want to make sure that you're understanding me. Like, even with the people that are closest to me in my life, I still have to worry about that.
Right.
And I know, like, for Ollie, like, to just touch on, like, that is definitely one of my goals, is to free him a little bit of that worry, because I think the worry stems from the fact that I wasn't diagnosed as a child, that, like, I had to really come up with coping tactics and deal with a lot of feedback from people that really didn't understand me, that really didn't understand where I was coming from or why I jump from thought to thought in such an abrupt way sometimes.
I mean, let's be really honest, because for people that have been hanging out at least for a minute, several things that I talk about on this podcast is how Hannah, one of my another very close friend of mine, who is a therapist, actually, she said it best when she told me that I explain things bottom to top instead of top to bottom. And just for the record, I've never had any sort of spectrum diagnosis. So I'm capable of doing that all on my own.
The end. I know. So
about a lot with the holidays, and I think just kind of in general, given kind of like my own at-home circumstances with the babies and that sort of thing. The last few episodes, we've been talking a lot about getting your kids involved in the kitchen and, what that looks like for me and how I approach that. And if that's a thing that, number one, if Ollie is even interested in it, right? Because last week I got an email. Somebody was asking, like, what are some things that I can do to get my kids interested? And then what are some projects? What are some actual tasks? And for me, regardless of whether or not you have a child that's on the spectrum, I think that it's really important to like honor and acknowledge where your kids are at in terms of interest level in the kitchen. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll never forget.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
and being like, fuck this. Like, I'd rather gouge my eyes out than go hiking. It's now one of my most favorite activities, as you know. But like, if my kids are not, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't have children on the spectrum. You know what I'm saying? And so I still I love being in the kitchen. It's absolutely something that I want to involve both of my kids in. But I try to be really mindful of, what sort of push and pull I'm willing to do with them. I mean, Maddox is so young, but Scarlett's 5, and while I try to include her in on some things, I also honor the fact that, like, number one, a 5-year-old's attention span is that of a
right, exactly, that of a 5-year-old. Weird.
But I also if she shows interest, I'm like, come on. But as soon as she loses interest, even if it kind of bums me out personally, I just kind of let her have it. And I'm wondering if you find things similarly with Ollie, or if that's even something that y'all have been kind of walking through yet at this point.
So yeah, Ollie, I don't think I've said this yet, is 9. So he's a little bit older than Scarlett. He's in 4th grade. And so for a while now, since he was very little, we play chef and sous chef. Like, right. He loves to know, like, to have, like, a job always. But the hard thing for me, as somebody that is neurodivergent, managing a neurodivergent child in the kitchen, is that I oftentimes will get hyper-focused on stuff, and, like, a lot of it is organic for me. Like, how does this feel? How does it smell? How does it taste? And when I have to be managing Oliver at the same time in the kitchen, it makes things a little more difficult for me. Obviously, like, I'm a parent, so if he has an interest, obviously I suck it up and that's how things go. But I will say, like, instead of being a little bit more creative in the kitchen, it definitely is going to be something that's, like, more recipe driven, and we're measuring out, and because that's something that Oliver is very good at. He's very precise. He likes to do things in a precise way. So, and the hard part about that is if we diverge from that precision, he's liable to have a behavioral feedback for that.
Right.
So, like, if I'm like, I do a heaping tablespoon of something and I don't level it off, and, like, he has a way in his head that he thinks something should go, and if it diverges from that, then I could have a behavioral repercussion for that. So, like, that could look like getting very frustrated, stopping what we're doing in the middle and having to have, like, a conversation where I talk him down. It can be very frustrating for him as much as he does want to be involved. And we do watch shows like MasterChef Junior or even regular MasterChef, and, like, he loves watching it. And I think, and he does ask to be, can I be your sous chef? And I'm like, yeah, totally. Like, this is definitely a recipe that we can do that, but I do have to pick and choose. Like, it can't just be like, yes, you're always going to be by my side in the kitchen.
Right.
Because it can be frustrating for both of us, and, like, I don't ever want to put him in that kind of a position.
Well, like I said, I think that it doesn't, this is like a mom/parent type thing. You know what I'm saying?
For sure, yeah, for sure.
Regardless of whether or not, you have you or your, yourself or your kids are on the spectrum, I think at the end of the day, that's like some mom shit. You know what I mean? Like,
it's some deep mom shit. Yeah,
there's some mom shit, because I don't necessarily have to worry about, number one, I have somebody that is not consistently reading right, so she would have no fucking clue if I was like, well, we're just going to pour some. Just because I know Ollie as a person, and obviously he is reading and has been reading for some time, I could see how that would be overwhelming to him to sort of, like, divert from the original plan. And then
that's the big thing.
Knowing you as well as I do, I also know how frustrating it is. And again, regardless, right, like when our kids get hung up on a certain outcome or how things should be, or when they get this idea in their head of, like, what things should specifically look like, and then they suddenly don't, the fallout from that, you're just like, fuck it, we're eating grilled cheese, there is no sous chef.
Literally driving to Taco Bell as we speak, yes. Exactly. Like, it truly, I'm like, I give up, and that's all there is. Amen. Like, I can't, like, there's not, it's just going to be a total, I'm like, okay, well, we're going to just short circuit and we'll deal with this later. It's fine.
Are you guys in a position or at a, like, has he shown enough interest so far that, you know, allowing him to sort of be in the kitchen solo, is that a thing that y'all are doing or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
No, because he's very forgetful. So, like, so yes and no then, actually. So if he is going to, I wouldn't say any cooking per se, but like he can put a sandwich together. He can do a PB&J for himself. He can get himself a yogurt, you know, like, I mean, those kind of things, yes. But like he can make his own bowl of cereal. That's something that I don't care about. Anything that involves turning the stove on is going to be a hard no on the solo operations for my son. Yeah,
I think that's important to note, though, right? It's because, like, for example, I mean, I did. I look back. I started being in the kitchen unsupervised at Scarlett's age, okay? So if you can...
Oh, yeah, no, I think every kid is so different. That's the thing. Like, if you know your kid... Yeah.
That's the thing is, like, when I think about, like, would I let Scarlett, like, in the kitchen? No.
I can't. I know.
But I think that this is, like, a conversation around executive function, though, more than anything, right? Like,
absolutely. Listen, if I didn't tell my kid he has to put his shoes on to go to school, he would literally walk out of the door without shoes on.
So, I mean, I think that goes back to, it's more, you know, this is specific to what we're talking about in this episode as far as, like, you know, what are our capabilities? What are the reasons that we are in the kitchen? And then as a parent, you know, to somebody that is also on the spectrum, you know, like, this is all about, number one, knowing that kids all have different kinds of abilities, and no matter their age, they're always at a different place, right? But
totally.
Have two folks that, you know, both have their own issues with executive function, right? Like, I can absolutely see why turning Oliver in the kitchen with, like, a knife and a hot pan is maybe.
God bless America. It would be a situation, okay? Like, truly, I love him to death. He means so well. He has the best heart in the world. I know he would probably, you know, love it, but I would be a nervous wreck. I would be hovering over every single, like, I would just be a nervous wreck. It would be really bad.
It would be fun for anybody at that point. It would be like the idea of wanting to be in the kitchen and have creative freedom. Now at this point is fucked for Oliver, and also you're like hyperventilating into a paper bag. So,
literally like having to take a walk around the block. Like, it would be really serious. So that's something that I know Ollie, I know, like, and James and I have talked about, my partner, James and I have talked about, you know, when we think that is going to be the right time, because, you know, we do watch MasterChef and MasterChef Junior, and you see these kids, like, making a perfect fucking souffle, and I'm like, cooking, like fucking filet of sole. I'm like, what? Like, they're younger than Ollie. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, like, that's just a different, you know, it's just a different scenario, because it's just not what's going to be appropriate for him. The other thing is, too, like, I'm going to tell you, the big thing, I think, especially with Oliver, and I am to a certain amount as well, is that a lot of people that are neurodivergent or on the spectrum are very textural eaters.
Right.
And so, like, I will tell you, it is my dying wish to be able to make a meal plan and follow it for the week. It's never going to happen, ever. Like, it will never happen. I cannot get it together enough to, like, make a meal plan and then follow that meal plan for the week. But I wish I could, but it's just not a reality for anybody at this point.
Well, wait though, like, is that when we're talking specifically, you might have this plan, right? Like, okay, this is what we're doing, Monday, this is what we're doing Tuesday. Are you saying that it's not followed through because of your executive function, or is it not followed through because maybe Oliver really dug this food yesterday, but like from a textural standpoint, it's a fucking no today, or is it like a combination of both?
So textural issues are not going to be day to day for him, at least, or for me. It's just a hard no, like in terms of textural issues. For me, not being able to plan a meal, plan for the week, or like do grocery shopping for the week, like it's very piecemeal because of my executive functioning issues. And then like also having to remember, like, Oliver will not eat mashed potatoes. He will literally gag and vomit, and has, because I forgot he didn't like mashed potatoes and served the mashed potatoes, and trying to be a good kid, he was eating them and then literally gagged and puked on his food. So
I think that it's really important to mention this part, like not that being on this spectrum is necessarily glamorous, but you and I have talked several times about how in the past it has been looked at as, a disability, and you and I both agree that no thank you, no ma'am.
No thank you. It's my superpower. It's Ollie's superpower too, big time. Like,
I think that like talking about some of the fallout of what it might look like, because I do have a cousin that is also on the spectrum, and I experienced that growing up as a kid. Watching him with textural issues and not being diagnosed yet, right? And watching him struggle and, color specific and textural specific.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Specific. And I think that is when you're talking about being around somebody, especially, this dynamic of like parent and child, mealtime shenanigans like are already a fucking nightmare, right? Like nobody, spectrum or not, nobody is trying to fuck around at meal times, right? Like we're all just trying to like feed ourselves, feed our kids, and like move on. We don't want to deal with the pickiness. We don't, and you know how lucky I am, and I have said this 2 billion
You're
times.
so lucky. She's so good. She eats everything.
She eats everything, and she always has, and it's never been a fucking issue. And just like, if that's the hill that I get to die on, I'll gladly die tomorrow, to be real honest with you, because I know the struggle, spectrum or not, of what it looks like around mealtime shenanigans. But I think that there's an added layer when it's compounded with this is why I'm experiencing the fallout of like mealtime shenanigans.
Yeah.
And also,
I think so too. I mean, he has a visceral reaction to certain things, and it's just you can't be like, no, you have to eat everything on your plate or else, like like how my mom and dad were with me. Like I was like, okay,
so, yeah, but like that was so many of our experiences as children was like, clean your plate. You're going to eat everything, okay? And this is like, way before we were having the kinds of conversations that we're having now about, folks on the spectrum. And I'm like, man, number one, thank fuck we've come at least as far as we have so far, because I just can't even imagine, like, not knowing that that's something that your child is experiencing. But then, like, the fallout from that and, like, the guilt that you could potentially feel of, like, I was making my kid, eat all of XYZ because that's what I thought I needed to do, when really they, like, physically cannot. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like,
I think, like, my mom, like, so that's something like a badge that, I think I still wear a little bit, like, with my parents. Like, I was always the difficult one. And so a lot of the kind of behaviors that I was expressing that made me the difficult one was like, being extremely blunt with my language, which I still am. Like, I can't really help it. Like, that's just how I process things. And having like a ton of energy. I know, weird. I can't imagine. But like, having, issues with certain foods, having issues with certain textures, with certain clothing, You know, like I was always like, oh, this is the, you know, she's just being Miss Priss, like having to have like soft clothes, like because scratchy textures freak me out, and like I will literally have a terrible day if like the texture of something is freaking me out. You know, like me and my soft sweatpants, like I like literally will wait like a child on Christmas morning at the dryer for my sweatpants to come out. So like it's, you know, for me, like those are the things that kind of marked me, like even just within my family as a weirdo, like from the beginning. And now I realize because again, I was diagnosed only as an adult, I only realized that I was even autistic when I had a child that was, and I was like, wait, I relate to so many things. Hold on. And I know. And so I'm like, oh, that's why I'm terrible at these things. And, like, it really did open, like, for instance, I don't really take advantage of any resources because I'm autistic. Like, I just am. Right. So, but what the diagnosis brought to me is, like, in the ability to walk away from certain things and certain guilt that I had as the child of parents that didn't understand who I was.
Right.
And that's very much, like, what I am trying to avoid with my son. You know, trying to make sure that he does feel understood and that I do get it. And like we have a lot of conversations, especially around food, where I break down, like I totally understand that it feels weird in your mouth. It makes you have a feeling that you don't like, and you don't have to do it. Like, and whereas I, like you said, like a lot of people, and I'm 40, so just say, gonna go ahead and say it out loud. So, but like a lot of people in my generation, like, did not get that, you know, and also like it wasn't really understood at that point either. So even if there were accommodations for somebody that wasn't neurotypical, it was definitely like the scarlet letter, like, you know, oh, you have to go to this, like, oh, you know, like, so, like, for Oliver, like, he, you know, has certain things that he is allowed to do at school because he has certain needs, like, you know, his energy needs to go in certain places. So, you know, and I think that in terms of, you know, making sure that he is understood, especially, like, food is just something that is at the center of our lives, right? Like, right. It needs you, and for necessity, but also, like, I grew up in an Italian household. I was involved in the kitchen from a very, very young age with my grandmothers and my great-grandmother even, and my mom. And so, like, you know, it very much is the center of my culture as an Italian. You know, it's very, very food-centric. And so, you know, that's how I know how to express my love to people. It's how I know, you know, that I can have a freedom and feel creative. And I do want Oliver to feel that, but also, like, he's not he's not me. Like, so he's like me, but he's not me. And so there are certain, like, push and pull moments, like you were saying earlier, that I think, especially in the kitchen, you know, do validate certain things for him, but I can tell, like, he's not as into it as I was or am. And that's okay. Like, I'm totally okay with that. Like, he doesn't need to be.
We don't know what, nobody ever knows. I mean, who knows? Like, maybe Oliver, like, becomes a great chef someday, and maybe the irony of, like, what I do and how much I cook and the fact that my business is cooking and baking related, maybe Scarlett is like, fuck this, I'm sustaining off of quesadillas I made in the microwave forever. I mean, you just never know, right? But I mean,
unlikely, but yeah, maybe.
I feel like, you know, I'm so lucky to be able to know you and love you and know and love your family the way that I do. And it's been such a perspective thing for me. And, you know, like we said before, I've never thought that, like, knowing you or communicating with you has ever been burdensome. I think that our friendship and our working relationship has taught me a lot about myself, and also what it is like to keep company with somebody that maybe is on
different,
you know.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, it's always been such a blessing, and I think that Oliver and Iggy are both so lucky to have you as their mama in and out of the kitchen. And I'm glad that you hung out with me and did this with me. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. I'm sorry if it was meandering, but you know.
I mean, has anybody ever listened to this podcast ever again? We're explaining things bottom to top. I think that, you know, it would be cool to possibly, you know, if you're listening to this and you have maybe specific questions for Lara, you can always email me and I can get them to her and connect y'all. But other than that, yeah, like I said, I'm grateful that we got to do this, and I'm so glad that you brought this up as an option. I think that it has been, regardless of whether or not it's fucking meandering, I think it's insightful. Amen. And that's the whole point.
Amen. Yeah, I'm very excited to, and feel very grateful to, of course, have you in my life. And I'm also excited to, you know, participate and bring a little bit of perspective to, you know, and I think that this is a very weird area in terms of, I don't think a lot of people talk about, you know, how different it can be, you know, being a little bit, you know, neurodivergent and in the kitchen. It's kind of a different topic. I really haven't heard very much about it.
That's why you brought it up and said something. I think that it was a great idea, and I'm glad that we got to do this. So,
yay!
Yeah, let's think of some more reasons why we can make our relationship and friendship food adjacent so that we can do this again.
I love it.
Okay. Well,
sounds good.
I'll talk to you in about 4 seconds when we hang up the phone and we start talking about work again. Okay?
Yay!
Bye.
Sounds good. Bye.